A very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us. My name is Yolanda Hendler. I'm the General Secretary at HIC. I'm just going to wait a few moments while our different participants enter the room. In the meantime, I'm going to share just some housekeeping. If you could perhaps share the slide, whoever's sharing screen, so we can connect to interpretation. In the meantime, to those of us that have
ديانا إذا تكرمتي ديانا ستقوم بذلك حالا.
Diana is going to do this.
Great.
So please, Diana.
Wonderful. Here we go. So again, for those that have just joined, please feel very welcome. My name is Yolanda Hendler. I'm General Secretary at HIC. And before we start, just a few technical instructions. We have interpretation for our co-learning space in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. You can click on the small globe at the bottom and select your language. There will be some instructions shared on the chat as well. Please also share your name. So rename yourself, please, if you haven't yet done so, so we can recognize your name. And please also feel free to let us know who you are and write your name and your organization in the chat. Then the chat is a space really where we welcome your contributions, thoughts, questions, clarifications. So feel free to use that during our co-learning space sessions. We will be having 4 live sessions over the next month, which we'll share more with you. And at the same time, we will also be meeting on a platform, Google Classroom, between sessions, which we will also share more with you during the close of the program today. And then lastly, when you're not speaking, please mute yourself so that we can make sure that our interpreters can hear you clearly. If your mic is open, one of the support team will mute. And lastly, because we have interpretation, please remember to speak slowly so that we can get a clear interpretation, yes, in the various languages. So with all the housekeeping said and done, if you can move to the next slide, please, Diana. I would like to introduce us to the question of what is a co-learning space and why are we here together talking about co-learning. And there are really 3 aspects of a co-learning space that we want to highlight and why we come together. The first one is for collaborative learning. And by that, we mean learning where everyone's ways of knowing and doing counts, has value, and is valued as well. The second reason for co-learning is that it's a space where we want to foster cross-regional political reflection and solidarity. And we want to do this by talking about the various similarities and differences across our various regional contexts. I'm sure you will see in the chat that we have participants really from across the globe as well. And then lastly, the purpose of the co-learning spaces are for pluralizing our advocacy work and very much identifying collectively identifying the changes that we want to bring about as a coalition to target key advocacy processes and to craft together our advocacy strategies and messages. What are the precedents? Where does co-learning come from, or why do we do this in HIC? You can skip to the next slide, please. And thank you. So you will know, if you have been part of HIC for a while, that HIC has a very long history of regional and cross-regional learning practices. And so this is really not something new for HIC, but something that is at the heart of what HIC does as a coalition. And yeah, exchanging learning, solidarity across regional political reflection and advocacy. In 2022, last year, we held 3 co-learning spaces, and some of you may have joined us for those. And they were on 3 topics, which you can see on the screen. The first was on feminist approaches to habitat. The second one was on land rights. And the third one was on multi-level advocacy, or advocacy in multiple spheres. And you may be asking yourselves, why climate justice? Why are we pursuing this particular theme? And what is the angle that we will be taking? And the reason that we are looking at climate justice is because each of the co-learning spaces that we have pursued so far has looked at one of the 4 strategic themes of HIC, which are housing and land rights, social production of habitat and gender, and habitat and environment. And so climate justice really speaks to that 4th strategic theme. In the month of November, we will also be holding a co-learning space on social production of habitat. You can skip to the next slide, please. What is the objective of this co-learning space? It's really to develop a common understanding of climate justice, and particularly climate justice in relation to habitat, for the purpose of strengthened cross-regional solidarity, to build shared intervention strategies and identify joint actions. Again, you'll see it's very much about learning hand in hand with strategizing and advocating for climate justice. And then lastly, just before I wrap up and hand over to Hala, over the next 4 Thursdays, we will be exploring 4 different topics. And I just want to give you a quick overview of what those look like. Next slide, please. And the topic of today is about defining and redefining climate change and climate justice. So really grounding ourselves in what that means and our various approaches to this topic. Session 2 is about looking at legal, policy, and human rights frameworks related to climate justice. That will be taking place next Thursday on the 12th of October. Session 3 is about exploring what are our common struggles and strategies related to climate justice across the different contexts and regions. And then session 4, which will take place on the 26th of October, is making an explicit link to advocacy work and targeting key advocacy processes, and also really crafting together elements of a shared advocacy strategy. So thank you for that. Welcome once again. And Hala, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا يولاند للتقديم.
Thank you very much, Yolande. In fact, this is the best way to ask, why do we have such co-learning space meetings and sessions? But allow me, before we start with our sessions, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Hala Murad. I live in Jordan. I'm in the Arab region, in the Middle East, in the Arab region. In fact, I joined one of the associations, civil society associations in Jordan. We are concerned with the environment, and we link that to all the contents in Habitat. We have a good relation with Habitat, with HIC, and we work together on different issues, legal issues and things to do with rights. We have a group that works on environment change and environmental justice. I work with my colleague. I hope Diana will take the floor now and that she will be introducing herself. She's also a member of the co-learning. Diana, please take the floor.
Thank you, dear Hala, and welcome to all our participants again. Apologies, I can't turn on my camera now, but I'm working on it. My name is Diana Washira, and I'm the HIC Learning Officer, and it's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm also based in Nairobi, Kenya. So back to you, Hala.
شكرا ديانا. وديانا
Thank you, Diana. In fact, Diana takes care of a lot of work, and she did a lot with our speakers. They know her very well. They all recognize her work. Also, we have another person from Latin America. Please take the floor, dear. We want to know you better. Ariel, can you hear me?
Hello, I am Areli Sandoval. I am a learning officer for the International Coalition of Habitat, HIC, Latin America. I am in Mexico. I'm pleased to be here.
أهلا أريل. وأيضا أريل تقود مجموعة العمل الخاصة.
Yes, Ariel is welcome, and she's also working in the group of the social production team. And we had 6 facilitators from different regions. They were working closely during the last 5 months, and in fact you will see the result of this work. Laura, would you please introduce yourself? Please, Laura, we hear you. The floor is yours.
Welcome everyone. My name is Laura Tabit. I'm from Egypt. I'm co-founder of an initiative called Nawaya that works with small-scale farming families on agroecology. And we've been a HIC member since 2017, and very happy to be with you today. Thank you for joining.
أهلا لورا.
Hello, Laura. We have another facilitator, Humphrey. Can you hear me, Humphrey?
Yes, I can hear you very loud and clear. My name is Humphrey Otieno from Kenya, Nairobi. I'm a member of Kenya Social Movement Network and also a member of HIC. I am delighted to be part of this conversation. And yes, let's have a great conversation. Thank you.
أهلا Humphrey.
Hello, Humphrey, you're welcome. We have another facilitator from Latin America. We can hear you. Can you please take the floor?
Hola, bueno, supongo que soy yo porque no está
Hello,
Enrique, que es el compañero de América
I
Latina.
think it's me because Enrique is also
Hello.
from Latin America. Hello, everyone. I am Ellis Martinez from Mexico. I represent Community Cooperation, and we're also members of HIC. We are an NGO that accompanies social production of habitat processes in rural areas in Mexico, and we work mainly with indigenous peoples and agricultural people that have adapted to climate conditions and have protected their ecosystems, but they have also been subject to epistemological and structural violence that makes them vulnerable in the face of the crisis that we're facing. I am very thankful and happy to be part of this space. I would like to circle back to what Jose Marti said. The best way of saying is doing, and I'm glad that we are building this learning because this will generate more actions that are intended to fight against climate injustice. Thank you.
شكرا إلسي. ننتقل إلى فرانك.
Thank you, Elsie. And now we move to Frank. Frank. Frank.
Indeed. Thank you, Hala, for giving me the floor. My name is Frank Olivier Kwame. I'm a coordinator of an organization called Humanita Solidaris Cameroon. We work on social production of habitat and also on the right to housing. We work in collaboration also with other partners on climate change. And that's why I'm a facilitator on this co-learning space on climate justice, because climate is the determining factor in social production of habitat. I hope, as Humphrey has said, that we'll have good discussions and good exchanges that will lead to advocacy, which will help us influence national and international policies, as well as all international systems, so that vulnerable populations can have access to land, to housing, and sustainable habitats. Thank you.
شكرا فرانك. وأخيرا عبير من المنطقة العربية.
Frank. Now Abir from the region. Hello, my name is Abir. I'm a member of one of the initiatives in Palestine, and I'm also a member of HIC. I also work as a facilitator in the co-learning space. I'm very happy that we are working together towards this climate justice for all. Thank you. Hala? Hala? We can't hear you. I'm sorry, says Hala. I'm sorry, my mic was muted. I want to say that we also have another colleague from Brasilia, and he's a lawyer, and he's working on the same topics. He is working in Latin America on climate changes, but sorry that he's not with us today. He's traveling, and that's why he apologizes for not being able to join us today. We will get to know him later. And now allow me to tell you that in this session, we got to know the facilitators and to know the secretariat, and who is running actually this co-learning space. And we would now like to know the participants. We are going to do this in an interactive way. We hope that you will respond to this because what we are going to be doing now is that we are going to ask you questions, and we want to know who are you, where are you living, what are your expectations, and there is an interactive tool that we are going to be using perhaps we all have used it through different Zoom meetings and sessions. There is a link. I'm going to put it on in the chat, and it is called the Menti tool. We need where you come from and where you are sharing from, and want to know your expectations. What are the outcomes that you expect of this co-learning space? What are you hoping for, and why did you decide to participate? We'll give you a couple of minutes for you to actually work on this code, and also you have the link. We'll give you 2 minutes and we'll be waiting for your reactions.
Hala, are we okay? Are we waiting for...
نعم، نحن ننتظر فقط أن يقوم الزملاء.
Yes, we are just waiting for the participants to put their expectations, through using the link, and after that we'll be sharing this with you. We are just waiting for participants to use the link and to put their comments. Yolanda, the floor is yours.
Hala, thank you so much. Just while everyone is clicking on the Menti link and answering the questions, I just wanted to share that what makes this co-learning space special and different perhaps from other co-learning spaces is that the entire program and the content has been conceptualized by the facilitators that you've just met. And each of them are part of HIC member organizations. And so we really envisage this also to be a horizontal space of exchange. And thank you all very much for introducing yourselves. Perhaps, Hala, we could even share the screen of the Mentimeter so we could see the different responses as they pop up to the various questions.
Disculpa, Hala. Hay algunas personas preguntando.
Sorry, Hala. There are some people asking on the chat box, how can we use the Mentimeter? The instruction was not clear. Can you please repeat how can you work on the Mentimeter?
أنا فقط أريد أن أقول أن هنالك رابط الآن.
I want to say that there is a link. Ahmed put it again. So this link is in the chat box. It is www.menti.com, and you can log in, and it will ask you for a passcode or like a password. And in fact, you can put this number that is now written 182233978. It will take you to the question directly. And in this case, you are going to answer the question. It is very simple. All you have to do is to click on the link and to put the password, the numbers that we just read, and you can answer the question. I believe things are going to be clearer now. Any one of you who has a difficulty to log in? Okay, this is how it will look like. The screen is going to look like that. You will put your password and then you will find the question. What are your expectations? So you will find that the question is already in the 4 languages. Now we're going to send the link once more. Someone is asking for this link. Yes, we're going to send it again. Yes. And the password, it's 18223978. That's the password. So in this case, you just click on the link, and after that you put the number. It will take you to this screen, and you will find that there is a space where you are going to put your answer. What are your expectations? This is the question. Really, you still have your hand raised. You still want to take the floor?
No, I'm sorry. It's just that I was sharing my screen, and when I'm sharing my screen, I cannot put my hand down.
أوكي، شكرا. هل نستطيع أن نشارك الإجابات؟
Can we share the questions? Diana, can we share the questions? Sorry, the answers.
Yes, I'm just trying to, sorry, I'm having a technical problem on my side, but I'm just trying to put up my screen to share my screen. But as far as now, we are not having any responses yet. So I'm just monitoring. So we are just waiting for the responses as we speak. So maybe a few minutes, a few seconds, 2 seconds.
So if you are having trouble,
نحن فقط نريد أن
We are waiting for you, Diana. We just want to read the responses. Now I'm going to read what is written in Arabic. Diana is going to read in English, and so on and so forth. So let's wait and see who can share with us.
Thanks, Hala.
Shukran.
I'm just trying to share my screen, but let me see if Yolande can assist with that.
may I suggest, if you can't access Mentimeter, no problem. We can share the questions in the chat, and you can just add what your expectations for the co-learning spaces are in the chat, and we will work with that while we figure out some of the technical glitch in the background. So the question 1 is, what are your expectations of this co-learning space? What would you like to experience over the next 4 weeks? So if you can't access Mentimeter, please put your responses in the chat.
أعيد أن أكرر ما قالته.
I want to repeat what Yolande said. She said that we can write directly on the chat box. If the link is not working, no problem. You can just write your answer in the chat area. we are asking you, what do you expect from this co-learning space? You can actually share through the chat box. If you cannot use the website that we have provided earlier.
شكرا أستاذة هالة بركات تقول أنها أجابت عبر الموقع. أيضا هنالك من يضعون توقعاتهم. نريد أن لاكدو يقول أنه يريد أن يعرف أكثر عن التغير المناخي وأيضا يزيد معارفه. هنالك أيضا مداخلات باللغات المختلفة. سنقوم بتجميع ذلك.
Sorry, Hala was saying there are responses in different languages, people writing their aspirations, their expectations. We can move.
Sorry, Hala, we were not getting the English translation. Yes. So,
can you hear me now?
What you just said, please.
Diana, can you hear me now? I just was saying if we can share with the colleagues their responses. We can only show the responses on the chat.
Is everyone else still getting interpretation? It's fine? Okay, perfect. Sorry, please continue, Hala.
تسمعينني الآن؟
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No. I was saying, Diana, that if we can't share the responses of the colleagues through the website, the Mentimeter, we can at least move to the session according to the agenda, move to the first session, and starting the next session, we can share with them their expectations as a type of an interactive session, starting with the next session. If we are not able to share the response now, let's move to the first session.
Thank you so much, Hala. Sorry for that technical problem. I think now we are good to go. I'll just get permission to share my screen, and I will be able to share what is coming up from the sessions. Now, as we wait for that to happen, let's kindly then listen to Laura. Laura will let us know what has been coming out from the asynchronous activities. We were able to share with you some questions from in preparation for this session, and so we will be able to see what did come up from these questions we asked you to share your experiences on. So Areli, if you could please share the screen as I work on getting the permission, and then Laura will take us through the next 5 minutes.
Thank you. So as part of the co-learning space to encourage learning and sharing and developing a common understanding of climate justice, we had 2 questions that we wanted to discuss today before we hear our speakers. The first one is, what do you understand as climate change and its impact in your context? And the second one, which is, what is climate justice to you? So that would be really great to hear from the different people here today with us, as well as we go through the following sessions as a kind of parallel activity that we engage in discussion on Google Classroom. I know this is our first session, so maybe not many people have had a chance to contribute their ideas of what they think or how they wanted to answer these 2 questions. So I will repeat them, and I will share with you some of the existing answers that we have already. But if there's anything that comes to your mind or anything you would like to share, please write it directly in the chat or put your hand up, and we can engage in a discussion together so that everyone can contribute, and that we can maybe have open discussion before we move to our speakers. So the first question, which was, what do you understand by climate change and its consequences in your context? Because we all work in different contexts. These are two different answers that we received. One person said that this, what they understand by climate change is that an increase in the temperature of the globe, which will cause thaws, ice, floods, droughts, and affect agriculture, and a greater preponderance of informal human settlements. So that's what somebody thought. Another person mentioned that they understand climate change as the modification of weather patterns worldwide, expressed in severe and atypical weather phenomena such as extreme heat, drought, torrential rains, and floods outside of what is expected each season, which is caused by global warming and in turn caused by greenhouse gas emissions resulting from various human activities that may be intensive and whose environmental and social impacts, including affecting human rights, have accumulated, especially from industrialization, extractivism, and the use of fossil fuels. So what other ideas do you have? What do you understand by climate change? These are just two answers. What we would like to do in this session and over the next couple of weeks is create that common understanding of what climate justice means to you. So I will encourage you to just think about this after seeing these answers. Please contribute in the chat or put your hand up. And I will also now go to the second question, which was, what does climate justice mean to you? So for some people, this means that the countries that benefit most from development should pay more for the damage they cause to the environment. For somebody else, for me, climate justice is a horizon, an aspiration for favorable conditions for the enjoyment to the right of a healthy and safe environment for all, as well as for the exercise of other human rights linked to habitat, without the threat of global warming and its particular devastating consequences on populations in conditions of greater risk and vulnerability. Advancing towards this horizon of climate justice requires us to stop making irresponsible, disjointed, short-term political and economic decisions without a human rights perspective. So these are, I know we're still at the beginning, these are the two first ideas that we have. So I will look at the chat now or encourage you, especially if you have something you would like to contribute live, please put your hands up so that we can hear from you. I'm looking in the chat. We're still on the expectations at the moment. If nobody has anything to share right of yet, we can move to the speakers, but I would like to encourage somebody to say, how do they see climate justice? Or what does it mean to you in the context of your work? If you work, for example, if you work in agriculture, if you work in habitat, maybe different people have different views of how climate justice would work in the context.
هنالك يد مرفوعة لورا.
Yes, go ahead, Derek.
Somebody raised their hands, Laura.
Manos levantadas.
Hello, thank you very much. I hope everyone.
It seems we have lost sound. Derek, can you hear us?
نحن فقدنا الصوت. نعم، فقدنا الترجمة أيضا.
We lost the sound.
أنا فاهمة طبعا، أنا فاهمة. قصدي فقدنا إنه صحتين. أنا كنت
Listen to me, can hear me. I am.
I am sorry, I didn't hear anything.
Hello.
مرحبا، نسمعك الآن.
Hello, hear you now.
عاد المايك لديك بالإقفال. هل يمكن إعادة فتح المايك؟
Your microphone is turned off. Can you open it? Can you turn it on, please?
Okay, thank you very much. like I was telling you, I'm Derek from Habitat Defenders Africa. So in our perspective of climate justice, as relating it to habitat rights, we consider it in recompensating the people who have been affected, and also looking at the perspective of the induced human human ways of bringing up these things of climate change. So for us to consider it in this way, that we relate it to find way of addressing the humans, the people who have been affected, by advocating for their rights, that they should be compensated, and those who are, for example, who are staying in informal settlements, who have been affected by floods, that we address it in this way, that they can access essentials and all other things that can help them in that way. That's how we are handling it, and that's how we are understanding climate justice. But we are hoping to understand it more from you people. Thank you.
شكرا لك لورا. نستطيع الانتقال إلى المتحدث الأول. تفضلي إذا
We can move to the first speaker, Laura. Go ahead, because now we are trying to catch up with the time. We are very anxious to listen to Enrique. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. Our first speaker, as you know, today is Enrique Viale. He will help us better define climate change and its drivers as environmental, economic, political, and social matter. Enrique Viale is an environmental lawyer and is the founder of the Argentine Association for Environmental Lawyers, in which he currently presides and presides over and has numerous cases for prevention, damage, and environmental recomposition in a strategic climate litigation. He is an active promoter of the National Glacier Law during its parliamentary process, participating in the debate of the commissions in the Chamber of the National Congress. He was a legislative advisor in the Senate of the nation and is currently an environmental consultant and communicator in radio and print media. Enrique will be speaking on the topic of defining climate change and its drivers, including a brief history of the Paris Accord and precedents as approaches to tackling climate change. He will speak with us for 15 minutes. And also, just as a note to everyone, as we're listening to Enrique, if you have any questions or ideas, in order not to forget them, you can write them in the chat so that we can then ask these questions to Enrique and open the floor and discussion together. Thank you, Enrique, very much for joining us today. Your work is very inspiring, and we are ready to hear from you now. Thank you.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo andan? Muy buenos días acá en Buenos Aires. Estoy muy contento.
Hi, good morning from Buenos Aires. I am so happy and pleased to be with you today. Whoever has the possibility of turning on their video cameras, because it is better for me to see a face and not just the name. It will enable us to overcome this virtuality that has good side and bad side. There's a little bit of boring thing to it, just to stare at a screen. So it is a great pleasure that we are all gathered here from around the world. It's very important, and I have been reading and following all these activities with great attention. I hope that everybody is hearing the translation if you don't speak Spanish. A brief introduction I will be doing, and then we will be tuning up and bringing up more details as long as we can hear other speakers. So as humanity, we are living discount prices, climate crisis, environmental crisis have made us abandon as many scientists and professionals the planet say, we have abandoned the time of the Holocene that has been lasting from 10, 12,000 years and allowed the expansion and the dominion of the human being over the earth. We are living the Anthropocene times. We have started a new geological time, whereas the human being has become transformations that It is a global transformation. And this is very important. These are 12,000 years, 10,000 or 12,000 years. And many authors have said that we have started another time, geological times, where the human mind is to blame for changing things. All the geological changes had not been related to the humankind activities. This responds to many indicators. It is fundamental to see that we have global warming, extension of species, and the losing of diversity, aquatic diversity, mammal diversity, and then all those changes in order to keep the balance of ecosystems, increase of global population. And you know more than anybody else the process of human concentration that we are undergoing. World, and then I am very sad to say it before you, but the world average of people that are living in cities is 54%, around that number. In Latin America, 72% approximately as well. And in Argentina, 92% of the Argentinians, we live in cities. That is contrary to the image that you have in Latamina, because you see that the farmland, these great extensions of land. 92% of Argentinians are living in the cities, and what we are expecting, 32% of the Argentinians, we are living in 0.4% of our territory. That's Buenos Aires and the suburban areas of Buenos Aires that is called Gran Buenos Aires, highly related, and we will be seeing that further on, and we will be comparing with the bad development plans that we have been imposed on oil that is really kicking out thousands of families from the farmlands all the way to the cities. Those are the kind of business models that have been sending families to live badly to the suburban areas of our country. So we are talking of Anthropocene. This is the changes and the risk of having crossed the borders of the planet that before the pandemic of COVID-19, which was clearly a sign that we are undergoing a crisis. It has emerging part of that crisis, a pandemic that's highly related to the loss of habitat, and therefore the leap of viruses from animals to humans. And then the scientists of the world do not know how to warn us, how to tell us that we are undergoing a crisis, that we should act upon it. And at that moment, we were signing a letter for all the scientists alerting of this climatic crisis. Or lateral ecosystems and humanities, all these chain reactions can cause important changes in ecosystems, on societies, and on economies that could make that huge areas of land on Earth will become inhabitable. This is what have been signed by 11,000 scientists that published this public letter, but that had not been seen because of COVID time. That COVID was the only thing that we heard about, and that other topics were neglected. And beyond on how and when Anthropocene started, well, there's a huge debate going on, and we will not be covering it in full detail. Some say from Industrial Revolution, that is the breaking point, where you have this fossil fuel instead of carbon, and the others say at the beginning of this century, that is related to oil in a massive way, that is the last century. And modernity on a modernism. Oh, no, we should not be calling it Anthropocene, because it is capitalist modernity, the way of managing economies that was causing this climate crisis, and they cap it a cap Anthropocene. So other authors are talking after the Second World War when, you know, it might be the starting point for the Anthropocene when the first atomic bomb was launched. But whatever the beginning, because it's not talking, we're just talking about of 30 or 40 years of difference. The scientists agree that the acceleration of social development has been increasing. It's not the first 10 years, but the 31st years. And then we have witnessed this phenomenon of acceleration of social metabolism that is being translated and interact between nature and society. A consumption model has been consolidated that demands a greater amount of raw materials and energy for its maintenance, which drives the increase of social metabolism and brings with it a greater pressure on natural resources and territories. That accumulation by exposition that has been mentioned in Harvey, it is extractivist model, and in Latin America and Africa and the southern countries have led us to play a role in this Anthropocene era, something that we cannot discuss, a fate that has been imposed. We are the providers of raw materials for the overconsumption of the northern countries. And the northern development has been based on the extraction of the southern countries. And that is not new. We cannot stop from seeing the climate change with this perspective, or under this perspective, the old environmental debt that is being renewed constantly. And there's where we find this concept of climate justice. You know that the United States, it's only 4% of the world population, and they are issuing 18–19% of the greenhouse effect gases, and only a handful of companies are provoking this climate change. And this is key, that an organization such as HIC that has a social responsibility that's fighting for social justice, then you have to take into account social justice and climate justice together. We cannot neglect who the real liables are, because normally they say it's climate change that is to blame, but no, it is not climate change that caused that flood. Even the speeches of governments, they say we are all liable for climate change. So if we are all, nobody is, you know? So, but we do have very specific people that are liable, that should be paying for it, not only on infrastructure and housing and so, but also what is environmental debt? How should they be paying? But I know that this is not for this event, but we have been working in this very specific way that financials are pressuring us and collapse our heads, such as they do in Argentina. We have this financial debt, and this could be translated to financial justice liability. We have trading. Trading covers everything. Everything is being privatized. Everything has an odor. Everything is sold and bought. The woods, the ecosystems, water, and we are depending on it on our lives. In a frame of an article that was published, we should be following society in the environment. We are activists, and we are paying attention, especially all those that are trying to be creating this social environment and put together. It is like a series, like a top film or movie. So many things are going on, have overcome the most science fiction, imagination. I could say that the last season of Black Mirror, I don't know if you watched that Black Mirror series. If you have seen it, I know that you know what I'm talking about, you know. We're talking about spectators, and because there's no surprise now. The reality overcame science fiction. The series, we are living something that's similar to what is showing on the series. That says that climate change does not exist. But naturalizing climatic events. We live in a huge city. I don't know if it's the largest of Latin America, but it is a very important city, like in Rosario, that lived 4 months under smoke of fires caused by businesses. And people make that as normal. They normalize that smoke that was on city on the computers. If you take a look, at least in Argentina, the temperature, and then they put the climate, and then just beside being sunny, winding, they put and with smoke. Not only we're making that as a natural thing, and we see the government that is making this as a normal thing that we should be living in our region. Well, we make that this climate crisis that is at a planet level or global level, and that has a relationship between the North and the South, has to be linked compulsory with territorial processes that are adopting local and regional specific rules. Agribusiness, intensive husbandry, expansion of forests, the construction of mega dams, large-scale animal factories, fishing frontiers, and even as the so-called green energy transition is in dispute. It has become the new altar to sacrifice the people of the South. It has acquired a new name, and this is called energy transition. Why should we not sacrifice the northern part of Argentina? Because that will be shared with Bolivia and Chile, where we have the lithium, where we say that 60% of the reserves of lithium are found. It's a mineral that is used on batteries in order to contain energy. And it's very important to have the electrification process in the vehicles when we want to get rid of fuel or gas. This is very powerful geopolitics that are put at risk indigenous communities again. They put the harmony of those places where they find that lithium. And then that they create this activity that will be lasting 20, 25, 30 years time. And that will be devastating those places, and that will be affecting those people that live in their natural area. And they will be forcing them to be living badly because they will become emergency neighborhoods or slums. And the lithium, they say that the water is worth more than lithium. Yes, water, it does not cost more. Lithium is worth more in money, but the worth of water is greater. This has become the little horses of cobalt, and all the great mining companies that have devastated large spaces now are coming for lithium. And obviously, the invasion of Russia to Ukraine and the global positioning have accelerated all the social conditions on geopolitics. They are sending me a message that I have to wrap up. We cannot. I just talked about the negative side, but I want to leave you with a positive note. There are so many experiences in all regions. We are part of a collective of social movements and territorial movements that is called Pacto Ecosocial and Intercultural del Sur. I'm going to put the link on the chat, and you will find to give an exit to this extractivist trend from the south to feed the north. We want to have reference not only of Latin America, but also from Africa and other areas. This Pacto Ecosocial of the South wants to make us believe that we can have resistance, resilience, a new pact with life, and go from economy of death to economy of life. This is social justice, climate justice, and habitat in that place plays a very important role. I would have so many other things to say, but I leave it there so I can respect the time that has been granted.
Thank you so much, Enrique.
Muchísimas gracias, Enrique.
Thank you so much for that wonderful session. I'll now hand over to Humphrey, who will lead us in our first question and answer session, reflection session, and then take us over to the next speaker. Humphrey, if you can hear me.
Yes, thank you very much. I think very, very insightful contribution there by Enrique. I think he has touched on so many things that have come out, looking at, in fact, giving that narrative, the population of 95% living in 0.44%. I think that is something that we need to talk to. How can that kind of population living in cities live in that kind of situation? And this is quite a scenario that we see also in Nairobi, where you find 63% of population living in only 2% of land. So anyway, I want to open it up and just to welcome you through questions and answers so that we have this interaction. So I don't know who has a question to Enrique so that we can hear from your perspective and also give your comments also. Is this something that relates to you? Are you seeing some similarity? So who wants to go first? Let me see your hands. Let me see your hands. Who wants to go first? Has anybody seen anybody? Haven't seen any hands. But as you can hear from Enrique, there's quite a number of this issue of loss and damage, which people keep running away from. I think it's going to, yes, I see already Anna Pastor. Anna Pastor, you want to speak to us? Welcome, Anna.
Muchas gracias, Humphrey.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. I just want to say that, first of all, everything that was presented by Enrique is so valuable, especially to all of us that are ignorant about climate justice related matters. But I would like him to share with us the positive side of things. He said that he ran out of time, but since he introduced the problems, I would like him to speak to us about the avenues for the future. What are we supposed to do right now?
Thank you, Anna. That is a very straight question to Enrique. Enrique, you want to, anybody else? I can take 3 questions before I open it, give it back to Enrique to respond. Any other question from any of us? Yes, Yolande.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Enrique. I think really showed us the various drivers of climate change and the interlinkage between the environmental, economic, political, and social matters. That justice and climate change is really not something we can approach in a siloed manner. I'm wondering if you would be able to just briefly tell us a little bit about the Paris Accord and any sort of other important global precedents that have been used to tackle climate change?
Okay, I'll take the 3rd question if there's anyone. Any 3rd question before I pass it to Enrique? Any questions? If not, we'll still have other chances. We'll open it up later. Just take note of your question and we'll pass it there. So Enrique, so number 1, since you opened the conversation, so what are the solutions? What are some of the solutions? Since you just talked of the negative part, what are the positive parts about this and what are the solutions? Number 2, what are some of the accords, some of the Paris Accord? What are some of the successes? What do we want to hear about around it? Enrique, back to
you. Muchas gracias por las preguntas.
Well, thank you very much for your questions and for listening to me. So let's go backwards. There was something interesting. Pope Francis, I'm not saying this because I'm religious. I'm saying this because he published a very, very interesting document. The first document that he published was in 2015, which is Abu Dhabi C. And I suggest everyone to read that attentively. And the first document about these topics, he talks about habitat and territory with a very harsh criticism. And the second one that he published was Laudato Dem. You can find it available in several languages, and it's magnificent. In my opinion, these are the most important documents in the 21st century concerning climate and environment. In the latest Laudato, he quotes Donna Horrible. Just to give you an idea, this was unthinkable because we're talking about a pope. And this speaks volumes. But why am I talking about this when talking about the Paris Accord? Because the first criticism was published before the first summit on climate change back in 2015. That event was a turning point. This is to answer Yolanda's question. This had a lot of significance because that's when the Paris Accord was signed by many of the countries in the world, when they are explicitly agreeing to reducing greenhouse gases. So the temperature limit is not surpassed. This means this is a limit that dates back to the pre-industrial times. This is 1 degree. When talking about 1.5%, we shouldn't allow as humanity to there be an increase in climate temperature. So if we stopped our emissions, we can stay below the 1.5 degree limit. That was 2015. Many years have passed since then, and we are even talking about a 2 degree limit. But with every 0.5 degrees, and this is something I talk about in every public speaking opportunities I have, what is the problem with increasing 0.5? With every half of degree, there is an extinction of a species. with every half degree there is of an increase, there is total change in the environment. In the latest document, the Pope says it. The great majority of extreme climate events and consequences are unstoppable. They are hard to stop at this time. That's when we talk about adapting to climate change. We also talk about accountability and responsibility. The Paris Accord was signed, and the big powers of the North agreed to having a $1 billion fund, but that money was never seen, even though that amount was insignificant to the big powers of the world. And the obligations are not being observed. The Paris Accord also said that all countries should agree to it and submit to all the authorities. Observing the climate change accord, what their responsibilities as countries will be and how they will observe them. Sadly, those obligations are not being met, and the war in Ukraine was the detonating part of it all. In Ukraine, there is no access to energy. Now, going back to the Paris Accord, if I could say something that is brief and short, there will be a climate justice summit in the United Arab Emirates later this year. It's contradictory because the UAE is a oil-producing country, but there are big expectations about the summit in Brazil. I don't remember the author. I think it was Galeano, but I can't remember correctly. This is Summit 28, and this shows how bad we're doing. We should have given a solution to the problem back in the 10th summit, but we are in Summit 28 right now. And there is an author that says that everything started in the first climate summit. It was COP something. And this is a testament to that. On the positive side, I loved your question, Anna. It's very difficult to summarize that. In our website, paracosocialdelsur.com, you can see some information about. We need to talk about a new emancipatory horizon without going back to Africa is telling us that to get away from poverty, we need to find the root causes for poverty, which is extractivism. In Argentina, we're undergoing an energetic change, but we are doing a lot of work in extractivism in Argentina. Sadly enough, we have one of the most hydrocarbon places in the world. Vaca Muerta has been working on this for 10 years now. But our poverty is through the roof, and we need to expand the frontier of agribusiness.
Okay, great. Great. I think we are taking note of some of those commentary from Enrique. Enrique, did I cut you? Or, just to ensure that we are on the same page?
No entendí que si tengo que seguir o no. No entendí eso.
I don't understand if I'm supposed to continue or not.
No. I think your answers are spot on, and I think we have taken note of that. Yeah. So at this juncture, I also want to take this conversation to the next level, and I want to invite Adriana Elaine, who is the HIC president and professor in development planning and urban sustainability at the Ballet Development Planning Unit at University College of London, on London, resilience. She is also Ballet's Vice Dean International. Jan has over 30 years of international experience in research, postgraduate teaching, advisory, and training services, undertakings in over 25 countries across the globe, the global south. So Adriana will speak to us on the topic of defining and advancing climate justice in relation to habitat. So the nexus, the connection. And Adriana, you'll have 10 minutes to speak to us. Your 10 minutes starts now. Welcome, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Humphrey, and a real pleasure to be with you all today. And thanks a lot to Enrique as well, a very hard number to follow. And so I will try my best to make some of the connections. And if someone can let me know when I have 5 minutes left, that will be fantastic, just in case I get distracted and I'll lose count of the time. So a hard task, talking about climate justice, but I guess that the ball was left to talk about what is the hope, or perhaps more than the hope. And I think that the first thing to notice is that climate justice is a massive struggle, is a growing struggle, and I would say is our best chance and opportunity to really tackle what Enrique describes so well in terms of the crisis that we face today, the crisis of the capital of sin, this moment in history, in the history of Earth, not the history of humanity, where not just human action, but the impact of capital has transformed the actual conditions for a life of human life and non-human life. Sorry, if I go back to the previous one. Thank you. Points that in many cases we know are irreversible. So I want to say a couple of things and we go straight into climate justice. The image that you can see on the left-hand side here is from Batangas City in the Philippines, taken in 2016. And it's quite an iconic photo, because if we think about the beginning of what we think is the history of the climate justice movement, that's something that at least is recognized to date back to the 80s. So of course we could argue that it goes much longer in history, but that history or that movement was for a very long time associated with something to do with environmentalist movements in the global north. A very isolated question, a question very remote from the life of ordinary citizens, women and men across the world, and particularly across the global south. What that picture shows us is that this is changing massively. The climate justice movement is expanding its social force, and today we are seeing a movement that encompasses not only environmentalist movements, but workers' movements, feminist movements, indigenous movements, and the list goes on. So this, I would say, is a very important piece of good news. And it shows us as well, where do we need to look at for allies in this very uneven battle. Now, let me just take you through 3 key principles that the climate justice movements puts forward, just trying to simplify the discussion. There are 3 key principles that come through the climate justice movement in terms of what do we need to do? How do we have to respond to the climate change crisis? What type of action do we really need? And now we can go to the next. The first call is clearly for fair redistribution. And this Enrique described very well, so I'm showing there a couple of maps that show you're all familiar with, that show the claim that actually there is a massive and obscene asymmetry between the responsibility for producing emissions, the emissions that have taken us to this crisis, and the impacts of climate change. So what you see on the map on the top is very much a map that shows the overshoot emissions per country, and this was by 2015, I believe, the map. So it looks a bit worse than that. Now, countries in the red are showing those countries that are going well over what is called overshoot. Basically, they are going well over what should be considered their fair share of using the Earth capacity, absorptive capacity. Now, if you look at, of course, the United States, you will find that already in that year, in 2015, it had overshot 10 times its fair share. So a very, very critical picture. We could think about many, many more figures here, and Enrique provided a few. So, for instance, it's important to think that this is not only a question or a crisis that polarizes this between the global north, so-called global north, and the global south, but also within countries. Just to give you other figures that we could think about in terms of the distribution of these responsibilities. Between 1990 and 2015, the richest 10% of the world's population were responsible for more than half of the greenhouse emissions, while the richest 1% emitted twice as much as the total emissions produced by the poorest 50% of the population. And we could have many, many more figures. Now, the map on the bottom shows exactly the opposite. Shows how are different, in this case, countries being affected. Where is the burden, not the responsibility, but the burden of climate change being felt? And again, there is no surprise here, but what is important to see is that this map is made of a combination of vulnerability that is looking at food, water, health, ecosystem services, human habitat or built environment, and also infrastructure. So that combined vulnerability is the one that explains these critical levels of vulnerability. Let's go to the next one. I can see that I'm already going badly in terms of time. Now, the second key question that also the climate justice movement highlights very strongly is the fact that we are not only talking about denouncing, which is a very important function of the system of the movement, denouncing this, again, showing asymmetry between responsibilities and burdens, but also denouncing and looking to change and reshape the fair redistribution of resources. Again, there are many, many figures that we could share and look at, but the one that I'm trying to share with you today is looking at, for instance, what happened between 2012 and 2020 in terms of the climate finance flow that has been activated through the different COPs, the different agreements. And what we can see is that back in 2012, there was a massive bias towards mitigation actions in relation to adaptation. And that is something that we seem to be catching up, but it still is far from enough. With one of the critical problems being that actually the climate finance is not trickling down locally. So it's not trickling down to the places where the burden is being felt, and even less locally. So if we go to the next one. So if one of the questions is that of fair distribution, a second key question that the climate justice movement highlights and fights for is one of recognition. And this is important because in a way, this synthesis that I'm putting here is basically saying, well, if climate change exacerbates existing inequalities and also produces new ones, it is also important to then acknowledge that inequality makes climate action less effective or discriminatory. In other terms, there are two sides that are completely linked. As Nancy Fraser used to say, you are not going to be at the end of any redistributed effort if you are invisible. And the question of invisibility talks to indigenous peoples, talks to women. I know that we're going to come to that, talks to many, many groups, wrongly called minorities, who are still very marginalized from making decisions, from being recognized in the impacts they receive. Here, what is very, very important is that we think about the question of recognition in an intersectional way. That is to think about who is most affected and who needs to have a voice in this debate and in action, who needs to lead action and needs to have clear and effective access to finance across class, gender, race, and ethnicity, and of course the list goes on. The question, of course, if we go to the next one, is clearly exacerbated around, or not exacerbated, but clearly and obscenely shown in the case of the sort of the level of displacement that climate change is producing. Look at some of these figures. Since 2008, an average of 26.4 million people per year have been displaced by climate-related disasters. And I promise you that this is a complete underestimation, because it doesn't take into account anything than just large events. Since 2009, climate change displaces approximately 1 person every second. And these figures, when we think about displaced people, these are not just people. These are women, migrants, of a particular, there is a very strong correlation with regards to who is at that losing end. If I go to next. So the third question that the climate justice movement puts forward is the need to pursue parity in political participation. What we can see here in the game of the different COPs is that national governments, the last 30 years of negotiations on climate change and what to do have been, on the one hand, I think that I am over time, I'm going to stop very soon, dominated by national states with a massive responsibility for from a few states that have been paralyzing any form of action and clearly protecting the interests of the corporations that are very much leading this crisis. This is something that is undeniable. So when we talk about parity in political participation, we are not talking about just more participation. We are talking about opening a very different type of participation that is not tokenistic, that is not just open to manipulation or even confined to the spheres of democratic representative democracy. I'm going to finish because I know that you want me to. So in going to the next one.
Continúa, Adriana, continúa.
Continúa, okay.
Sí,
I thought that I'm doing badly.
You can continue, Adriana, because you were given more minutes.
I'm going to wrap up with this slide, and then I'm very happy to expand when we have a chat, yeah, after Priscilla's presentation. So I just want to finalize with one point. And because again, of course, we need to land all this in relation to habitat-related rights. What does it mean? What do these three key tenets that I talk, sorry, not four, but three key tenets that I talk about today really mean? A critical question is, you will see, has been again mentioned and is gaining great momentum, is this question of localizing climate action. But what I want to put forward is a notion that is not only about localization, but localization and democratization. This is extraordinarily important. And what I put here is something that perhaps could help us to come back to what we can see. I was looking, these are 8 principles that were put together by the IAID and the World Resources Institute that try to spell out what and how locally led adaptation might look like. And I invite you to think that these key principles are also crucial, not only for adaptation, but for adaptation, mitigation, and the very important question of loss and damage, the question that Enrique also started to talk about, the question of the environmental and climate debt that we need to clearly and strongly continue to fight for. So you can see them there. And in no order, yeah, in priority order, of obviously the question of evolving decision-making to the lowest appropriate level, addressing all structural inequalities, again, remembering what we learned about misrecognition. So the fact that certain groups, social groups, are at the end of receiving disproportional impacts has to do with conditions of structural inequalities that need to be tackled. Providing predictable and accessible funding, this is critical. I said before, yeah, adaptation flows, finance flows might be growing, still not enough, still they're not traveling to a local level, and let alone the question of reparation that comes connected with compensations and reparations for loss and damage. Fourth, investing in local capabilities to leave an institutional legacy. This is not about raising awareness. or just about raising awareness about what climate justice, climate change is. It's very much about building those capacities and also recognizing the capacities and capabilities that already exist on the ground. Building a robust understanding of climate risk and uncertainty, this is critical. We need to popularize a science of uncertainty because we are going to continue living with these conditions. Building flexibility in the design of programs and possibilities to learn by doing, because we haven't been in a similar crisis in the history of humankind before. So we cannot do without learning by doing. And last but not least, the principles of ensuring transparency and accountability, and of course, collaborative action and investment. I'm going to stop here. Apologies if I took over. I probably shared a tenth of what I wanted to, but this is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Those are wow. Those are the wow of climate justice, I can say. And I like that phrase of advancing climate justice is equals to localization and democratization. That is very powerful. And I think this is the take home for majority of us who are here to learn. And I think perhaps we need to set aside for you to take us through this subject, yeah, deeply, so that we be able to deepen the understanding. As you have said, let me just stop you there so that I can open it up later for us to have a conversation. At this juncture, let me invite Dr. Priscilla Achakpa, who is a global lead of a Women in Environment Program, WEP, a regional women-focused organization with headquarters in Abuja in Nigeria, a gender expert and development practitioner with 25 years of experience. She has held many positions at national and international level, working with a wide range of development actors, government, UN agencies, CSOs, and feminist network in the area of gender, environment, and climate change. Priscilla is also passionate about gender and the environment. So Priscilla will be speaking on the topic determining the impacts of climate injustice, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable groups. And here we are talking about women, children, elderly, indigenous people, including rural and urban communities. So Daktari, or what we call Dr. Priscilla, please, the floor is yours. We'll give you 10 or so minutes, depending on your presentation. Welcome, Daktari, or what you call Doctor.
Good evening from Abuja. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Good morning. I'm sorry that my network is not very strong, so I might not be showing my face. That is why I just put it now so that you can see me, and then I put it up because I don't want it to cut off when I start speaking because of the network connectivity. I hope that is fine. Thank you. Let me first and foremost appreciate the previous speakers, Andrena, and the first speaker who have done incredibly well by talking about the issues of climate justice. Indeed, I'm one of the movements, particularly in Africa and the world. I belong to the Women and Gender Constituency at the UNFCCC, which we are indeed looking at the issues of climate justice, but how it affects the gender sector. Now, let me just say that at June 2022 publication of the Environmental Justice Foundation titled In Search of Justice, How the Climate Crisis is Driving Inequality and Eroding Human Rights, reports that approximately 60% of greenhouse gas emissions are produced by 10 countries, whereas less than 3% come from the 100 least emitting countries. The report adds that the richest 10% of the global population generated 52% of the cumulative carbon emission from 1990 to 2015, where the poorest have generated a mere 7%. Yet, it is often the countries and the populations with the least historical responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions who are being impacted first and worst by the climate crisis. This is a clear definition of climate injustice, and climate actions must urgently increase in speed and ambition, and it must take place within the framework of climate justice. Let me start by saying that just last month, we had the African Climate Summit, which was held in Nairobi. Some of you, Humphrey, I know that you're from there. I don't know if you are there. It was a struggle to get the agenda of the indigenous people, the agenda of the women to be incorporated into the outcomes, even from the beginning. We have to fight from the background to ensure that the voices of the poor are being heard. And yet, it was a horizontal task. Towards the end, I was given an opportunity as an afterthought. What I mean as an afterthought, because we have to fight to get to the table, to get to the decision making, to get to the policy making. That is how climate injustice is being perpetrated for and by the people who are mostly affected by this climate change. And when I went to speak, I spoke on behalf of the whole of African women. And one of the things I said is African women cannot be an afterthought. African women and indigenous people cannot be an afterthought in decision and policy makings. It was because we had to fight to get there. And that is why the climate justice movement must increase in size, and every one of us must be part of it. Though the impact of climate change are felt by all humans across the world, specific regions and demographics disproportionately suffer the attendant risk, hazard shocks, and stresses. These groups may include, but are not limited to, women, children, persons with disabilities, the elderly, indigenous peoples, rural and urban communities. Climate change is worsening existing and historical regretted inequalities historically suffered by these groups. Women, and I take them according to how climate change impacts or injustices is being perpetrated by humans. Women, the issue of patriarchy is a major factor of inequality against women, fueled by sociocultural, religious, and economic factors. Patriarchy limits women's agency, their rights to education, health to ownership, power and control over their bodies, and to own critical resources such as land. Climate change has added a layer to the depth of inequality suffered by women. With limited fertile lands, low crop yields, scarce water, droughts and floods, women household cooking, as well as for other domestic uses. Women have had to walk longer distances to access fertile lands to engage, and that is if the lands are available, because there's the issues of commercialization and commodification of land. And of course, in some cultures, women cannot own land, you cannot even access it. I come from a culture and from a tribe where myself, I'm supposed to be a commodity, and not, I'm supposed to be inherited, I'm supposed to be property, and not to be, to have access or ownership of this very important resource, which is land. And so these are some of the challenges that women face. The second one had to do with children. In times of drought, water scarcity and extreme weather events, children who have weaker immunities are more susceptible to disease and death. Children also face extreme hunger, physical and emotional stress in times of weather-induced displacement, which also causes a disruption in the schooling/academic pursuits. Climate change thus worsens the situation of out-of-school children, especially those from poor households with low socioeconomic status. And let me add that the issues of menstrual hygiene and dropout of schools, of girls from school, is a huge thing, which is also an issue of climate change and needs to be addressed when we're talking about climate justice. The other aspect which I want to think about is the issue of people with disabilities. Often, people with disabilities are even not seen as an inclusion when issues of climate change is being discussed. Yet, they are limited by physical, mental, or visual function, and often requiring support of others to carry life functions. In terms of extreme weather events, the needs of these people are often considered secondary, especially that they are able to adequately navigate physical spaces unaided. People with disabilities are likely to be washed away by floods or burnt by wildfires due to their impaired mobilities. While ill from climate-induced diseases, persons with speech and hearing impairments are more unlikely to access adequate medical care due to challenges in access to health facilities, and when they eventually do, communicating with healthcare workers is difficult. I'll go to the third one, to the fourth one. The elderly, due to their frail natures, the elderly, similar to persons with disabilities, suffer various forms of immobilities and their need to be aided to navigate climate risks and impacts. The indigenous people suffer a stampede on their cultures. Food, indigenous knowledge by capitalists, inclined initiatives and actors. Climate change has increased the tensions over the use of scarce land resources, leading to increased land grabbing inhibited by indigenous people. Climate change, which has led to loss of biodiversity, erodes the cultural heritage and identity of indigenous peoples as they're compelled to alter their clothing patterns due to the loss of the natural materials with which they source from their environment. The rural communities lack adequate education and access to current and scientific information on the changes in weather and climate, which could enable them informed adaptive and mitigative actions due to the growing complex externalities in climate science and the changes in climate, which defy historical, indigenous, and traditional predictions. Rural dwellers risk the losses of their livelihoods due to their inability to access adequate climate information. Yet, some rural dwellers adhere to superstitions due to poor access to education, and these factors conjure to worsen inequalities suffered by rural dwellers. The urban communities, irrespective of the higher levels of education and knowledge on modern climate information, urban dwellers suffer severe risk occasioned by climate change. The cutting down of trees to make way for construction work exposes the soil to erosion. The sinking of boreholes creates boreholes and distorts the underground soil structure, making urban areas more susceptible to underground works. Shocks. Urban communities are thus more susceptible to flooding and other climate risks, such as dry spells and extreme temperatures, due to the heavy loss of tree and land cover in urban areas. And let me say that as a HIC member, right from 2001, 2002, 2003, we've been fighting the issues of urban injustices in Nigeria, particularly the issues of commercialization of land, the lack of adequate housing for the poor people who are termed to be living in slum structures in Nigeria. And of course, on several occasions, the previous administrations was thrown into what we call a detention area by the police because I had to speak on behalf of the people. And this is what is happening. You must have been reading that just about 3 weeks ago, the current administration went around Abuja City destroying where people who are supposed to be termed in court, the poor people, destroying their houses. And as we speak, we have a lot of homeless people in Abuja. And this is leading to serious insecurity because these people desire to live. These people desire every basic social amenities. And so if these people have lived in one place for more than 5 years, according to the laws of the land, and you have not removed them, if you are removing them, you have to take adequate measures to make sure that wherever you are locating them are places that they agree with. These laws are not adhered to. So we have a huge challenge. And this is not just, I believe, it's not just Nigeria, but this cut across several regions of the world. According to the IMF.
Please conclude, Dr. Chapter. Please conclude your remarks because of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm almost done. I just want to conclude by saying that according to the IMF, between 75 and 700 people are are projected to be vulnerable to drugs and lack of drinking water in Africa. And this is causing a lot of issues. We have massive migration of people. Instead of people seeing this migration as a kind of also mitigation or adaptation strategies, a lot of the other continents, especially the developed world, are seeing migration as an issue of insecurity and threat to them. But of course, people that are migrating are bringing a lot of innovations to their continent. And yet we are not seeing it from that perspective. In Asia, the issues of clean and fresh water is also a huge problem. And these are issues of injustices. The developed countries talked about paying or giving in grants about 100 billion every year to the developing countries. That has not happened. This is a clear case of injustice, and these are things that the social movement of climate justice must address. Thank you.
Great. You have left it at the very good point. Then call for social movements for justice to come out strongly. Thanks, Priscilla, Dr. Priscilla. Those were very, very, very critical issues that you have raised. But one fundamental thing that has touched me is the need to increase the space for social movement and social justice movements to come on board. I think this conversation is very, very healthy and very wanting. Apparently, because of time, we have to reduce it. We have to bring it to almost to close. But before that, I'll ask my co-facilitator Laura. Did you hear what have just emerged from the conversation, and what are some of the questions that you've gotten from some of the people posting on the chat? Yeah, and also as Laura comes, anybody with question? I've seen Maria. Anybody, please raise your hand so that we can take numbers, so that we can wrap it up in a better way. Over to you, Laura.
I've been, yes, following the chat. I mean, everyone's regions are so different that there's an echo of visibility and being able to advocate and having more communication around that. So that's a common thread that I've been observing in the chat.
Okay, great. Okay, so Marie, you have a question or comments? Welcome, Marie.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Quería hacer una pregunta a Diana. Aquí estamos organizando en HIC América Latina, con sede en México, un evento para el mes de
In
noviembre.
Latin America, in Mexico, we are organizing an event in how communities are resisting to climate change and what are the alternatives that they are giving to it. But when I try or when some terminologies are used that imposed by, let's say, the international bodies that are discussing climate change with all the risks that Enrique has highlighted that they don't want to see who is responsible or liable for. But when we're talking about the adaptation of communities, as Adriana has mentioned, they're either not at risk of falling with these concepts under the idea that, well, there's nothing else that to adapt yourself. This is a question that is related to the narrative. And I would like to know if in other countries, in other regions, are there any similar debates? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Are there similar debates in other regions and in any country? Who else wants to?
A ver, en otros países están teniendo este tipo de
Anyone
discusión
else
acerca
has
de
a
las
question
tecnologías y de
or a
esa
comment?
I think
adaptación.
the English channel
ustedes
still has
hacer algún
Spanish
comentario?
interpretation.
¿Tienen ustedes alguna pregunta?
If she can switch the channel to Spanish, that would be ideal.
Sorry to interrupt. I just heard that the Spanish interpretation is still on the English channel. So if you could jump back to the Spanish channel, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, as we switch, I see Hastings, Isadora. You have a question or a comment?
Sí, una pregunta para Adrián, para Enrique.
Well, I have a question for Adriana or Enrique. I would like to know, I know that there has been so much pressure done with the governments, normally with climate change on the UN, and they are addressing these demands that are there putting forward to the governments in order to regulate the production levels, controlling the production of industries in order to reduce emissions. But is there a map or how are we following or the other sector? The one is that it's fully producing and issuing these emissions. And is there a mapping on this industry that Enrique was mentioning that are those that are producing the highest number of emissions, so we can have very clear who they are with names and have a map of this industry and not just make it visible.
Yeah, so
but to start an action to be really demanding them to reduce but directly to those industries.
So like naming and shaming, yeah? So we want to start seeing them so that we can name them and shame them. Okay, great. Any other person? Any other question? Any comments? As we wait, okay, Irene Kinoti.
Thank you, Humphrey. Thank you, presenters as well. My question was Adriana. She was able to show us that the issue about fair distribution, especially when it comes to financing. And I think I really wanted to understand whenever we show, or based on the graph that she was showing us, where a lot of resources go to mitigation rather than adaptation. My question was, is there any effect when resources go to more of mitigation rather than adaptation, and what is the kind of course of action that we should be looking at as social movement champions?
Very great question. Then we have Anna Pastor.
Gracias, Humphrey. Simplemente
Thank you,
quería
Humphrey. I just wanted to say that it seems to me that the three presentations were well chosen because Enrique presented broadly the foundation, what happened, as we can see, the ugliest part. What we did in order to make it all this was to this climate change. Then Adriana presented what are the principles we have to be basing on in order to face from our own communities those terrible climate injustices. And then Priscilla has shown very clearly from those two maps that Adriana showed to us, the map on the top that had to do with who were affecting, and the map underneath that was showing the main victim regions and how much the people from the north are affecting. I think that Priscilla has shown very clearly the populations that are the most affected, the most vulnerable ones. So I wanted just to celebrate that that these three speakers have been very well chosen.
Okay, great. Anna, you have just summarized it, yeah? You are very keen following, eh? But on that note, let me invite Enrique. Are there debates happening in other continents? For Adriana, is there a map showing some of this extractive, and how can we start naming them and shaming them? And then and also as well as issues of financing. So should we finance mitigation, or should we finance, so you know, the chicken versus the hen? Okay, yeah. So over to you. Anyone can start. Adriana, you want to take the two, and then Enrique?
Sure, happy to do that. I will try to be brief, and I will leave the question from Isadora to Enrique, because I'm sure he will give a great response on that. So very briefly on the other two questions. And thank you so much, Anna, for the great summary. On the question of Sylvia, so when we speak about adaptation, don't we fall on just the nurture, in the sense that there is nothing else to do but to adapt, no? In a nutshell, that's what you put. I think that this is a very important issue that, again, the climate justice movement is trying to break through. The whole idea that we have areas of action where actually, you know, for the global south, the question is to adapt and also to leapfrog into, you know, to avoid the mitigation bill that the global north is facing. Clearly, this is not a question of mitigation versus adaptation, and even less mention the question of, again, the much longer reparation from the climate debt when we talk about loss, irreversible damage on loss, on loss and damage, irreversible changes around loss and damage. It is, I think, very, very clear and very important not to stop on the message that when we talk about what we can do, the question is just to build more resilience. This is a problem, and this is why many have a problem with the idea that actually resilience has become a very apolitical notion that obscures many of the other things that we can do. To give you a very practical example, when we look at any area, like if we look at housing justice, housing justice and climate justice are super connected. And if we look at the two, we will see that on the side of what people recognize as mitigation, there is no way not to look at, at future housing, how are housing needs going to be met. And a critical perspective here will be to say, actually, it's not about building more houses, but very much about thinking about the redeployment of existing housing, the affordability conditions around existing housing, the use of rental housing, and so on. So you will get immediately into issues like, for instance, how do we then control process of short-term tenancy, like those driven by Airbnb and so on, where housing again becomes a means to commodify and as a means again to exacerbate the climate justice, the climate change question. So the two are super connected. If we look at the other side, adaptation, we have to be very mindful that not only we are seeing climate displacement, as I mentioned, but we are seeing a whole wave, an epidemic of evictions, which are justified in the name of climate change. And this is terribly problematic. We see people being evicted for their own good. And this is something that, again, we need to knock down. Very quickly on the second question, Irene, fair redistribution. Although I talk more about resources, I don't think that fair redistribution only means resources. Again, it's not a question of mitigation versus adaptation or even loss and damage reparation, but much more about thinking completely different about any of the sectors. And another key area for redistribution has to do with care. We need to think about how do we revitalize the systems really that produce life, which are being threatened not only by climate change, but by the drivers of climate change, as Enrique so well explained.
Okay, awesome. Enrique, are there conversations happening in other continents? Are there
Sí, necesito que me... tuve un problema que tuve que salir un segundo por una urgencia y no pude... si me puedes repetir la pregunta.
I had an issue. Could you please repeat the question? Because I had to step out.
Yeah, so the question is, are there other conversations happening in other continents as far as what you presented are concerned? Now, there are other conversations happening.
Si puedo también participar, Enrique, otra pregunta muy importante de Isadora.
Another very important question from Isadora has to do with what is the system or the mechanisms in order to identify those that are responsible. That is the question that Isadora has raised. Is there a process that will enable us to identify them so we can shame them?
En términos socioambientales, me está escuchando de nuevo a mí.
The great debate, the great discussion going on social, environmental, is energy transition. That is the theme of the moment. We are quite concerned with that because it is a concept that is in dispute. There are two energy transitions that are fighting each other. One, corporate, market-driven, from the north to the south. And the south is the area that has to be sacrificed because it is the one that we provided with the raw materials. We are sacrificing our territory, so each people of the US will be entitled to have the two SUV, the electric vehicles, the EVs, or an European will have their EV, or the one that we are in dispute at fair solidarity, energy transition thought from the south to the south that will be generating a lot of jobs, but it should be in solidarity, energy for women, for what purpose? And we are quite concerned because that is a huge topic, the topic that is being discussed in our organizations with the North. What is the process of decarbonization? Any policies that will be reducing carbonization? That's good. But what is the impact at a local and regional level? The thing is that they are going in depth of a green extractivism, a green, whatever name they put on. Adriana has given me another question about the concepts or systems. The only president that's trying to having that environmental debt be paid is the president of Colombia. $30 million from Ecuador. There are some other places, little actions here and there, but unfortunately, we consider that we need to quantify environmental losses. In Bolivia, they try to quantify that, but we should be doing that in the nitty-gritty detail of things with very specific numbers, such as they do to ourselves.
Okay. Great, Enrique. I think at this juncture, you want to bring it home. I think it was a great.
Humphrey, can I say something before you close?
Yes, I was just actually going to invite you to do that. Actually, we want to give each one of you 1 minute to give your closing statement. Yeah, so we'll start with you.
When you're the last speaker, you are always at disadvantage.
No. It's okay. Just have your closing remarks.
I just want to say that today, a conference, a high-level conference is taking place in Germany, or took place in Germany, on green climate finance, as second replacement. And a lot of the polluters are there. A lot of political statements not translated in monetary value are being said. They talked about acknowledging, they talked about so many things, and of course, the polluters are everywhere. I heard one of the speakers talk about energy transition. What is energy transition? We have a lot of indigenous knowledge on our continent in the developing world. We need to leverage on those indigenous technology. Today, political statements again, they have pledged 9.322 billion US dollars. We don't know where that is going to be. How we share it, we don't even know as it is. So for us, the climate crisis is not a political issue. It is a matter of survival. It is a challenge that transcends borders and ideologies. It is a test of our humanity and our ability to come together as a global community. We have the knowledge, we have the technology, and the capacity to make a difference. Now we need to act. The clock is ticking, and there is no time for us. So as a body, this is the time that we should come together and come stronger to debunk most of these injustices that are perpetrated on the most vulnerable people around the world. I just wanted us to end my statement on that, and that we are stronger together, and being stronger together, we will be able to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Priscilla, Dr. Priscilla. And I think at that juncture, we want to bring it to close. We are sorry for going overboard by 3 minutes. It is indeed a great conversation, you can see. This is just the beginning of many series of conversation that we are going to have around climate justice, and looking forward to welcome all of you to have this great conversation. So at this juncture, I want to bring it back to Yolande to give us some closing, and also to thank all those who participated, and then we close it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I think Diana is actually the one who has got the overview of next steps and what we'll be doing in the next session. So I'll hand right over to you, Diana. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you, Humphrey. Good job facilitating. And thank you to our speakers, to our participants for all the amazing input you have shared in this session. We are really glad to have you in this first first session of the Climate Justice Co-Learning Space. I just want to quickly conclude by mentioning 3 key things. The first one is that we always welcome your input and your recommendations on how to improve our sessions. So we have prepared an evaluation form that we ask you to kindly fill in so that we are able to know how do we improve for the next session, which is next Thursday, and how do we make the session more impactful and facilitate more learning together. My colleague Pelisa will include the links in the chat, but we'll also share them through email. So please do not worry. The second thing I want to mention is that next week, we are going to have another very exciting session, and we will look on exchanging on the legal policy and human rights framework of climate justice. We are going to have very interesting speakers. We will have David Williams. We will have Dr. Ngo Nonga Marie from Cameroon. We will have Kelly from the Global Platform. And of course, we'll have Eric Chu, who's from the University of the UC Davis. So we'll send all this information with all these speakers, but we will have such an exciting conversation on these legal frameworks, policy frameworks, and of course, the human rights framework. And finally, in anticipation of this conversation next week, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your voice. We have shared an email before on Google Classroom, which is the platform where we are promoting exchange amongst ourselves as participants. So in our follow-up email, we will remind you to really get on this platform. Pelisa has sent you invites to join the platform. Please let us know. We have 2 exciting questions of asking you to share about key advocacy work or activism that you have been involved in towards legal frameworks on climate justice. Any local or regional or national examples you want to share with us, please let's look at that email once it comes out, and we will be able to exchange further in the Google Classroom space. Next week, we will start with a quick overview, especially highlighting the expectations that you shared in today's session. And with that, I just want to conclude. We have gone 12 minutes over time, apologies, but the conversation was just too sweet to pause. So we appreciate your time, we appreciate your input. And as we conclude, if you can please turn on your camera, let's take a family photo, a quick family photo. In celebration of our first session. If you're still there, let's take a quick family photo. I'll take it as we speak. Really nice to see you. Of course, looking lovely as usual. Another minute, another second of another family photo, and one last minute. Thank you guys, and thank you so much. See you next Thursday at the same time, and look forward to our emails, and please participate in the Google Classroom. Thank you so much, everyone. Nice to see you. Thank you so much. Facilitators, please remain. Don't forget. Thank you so much. Good job, everyone. Bye-bye.
¿Seguiremos con los intérpretes o ya no?
Are we going to keep interpretation or not?
Yes. We are going to keep interpretation for the next 17 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next week.
You want us to stop
recording? Yes, yes. I think we stop recording. I'm sorry, Pelissa,